Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are listening to this podcast. This is Yash, and welcome to the Wannabe UN Podcast. We are a group of multicultural and international students going through college in the United States who just decided to start a podcast to share our stories, experiences, and perspectives as multicultural students in America. And contribute to this great American experiment. So, this week's episodes are going to be solo episodes since it is our finals week. And the theme that we decided to do for these solo episodes was study abroad. Particularly, three of us went on study abroad trips this semester during the spring break. So, throughout the week, each of us is going to share our different experiences while we were on the trip and just share insights. We also asked viewer questions on our Instagram and on our Twitter. So we're going to answer mainly the focus of the episodes this week is going to be answering viewer questions and sharing our experiences. And yeah, let's jump right into it. Before we start the episode, I want to thank um, Adobe Creative Cloud, which has made it possible for us to create this podcast, do marketing for the podcast, and just bring this podcast to you, our viewers. Which uh, our university, Penn State, gives you access to Adobe Creative Cloud. You pay for it out of your tuition, so please make use of that. If you are a Penn State student, it is very easy to sign up for Adobe Creative Cloud, and please make the most of that service. We also want to thank LinkedIn Learning, um, because again, as Penn State students, we have access to LinkedIn Learning, and it gives us access to so many different courses on how to use Photoshop or how to build your own podcast, how to become a good podcast host. And again, those are all courses that helped us in delivering to you this product that we have today. So without further ado, let's just jump right into the viewer questions. And again, we got a lot of viewer questions, and we're contemplating if we should make a part two or not in the series since it's going to be finals week. Everybody's going to be going home. So there'll be a lot more pre recorded episodes or solo episodes we might have, or some Zoom calls that we might do for our episodes. So yeah, let us know if you want a part two in this series, specifically about my visit to Ghana. Um, Write comments to us, give us likes on YouTube, give us a review on Apple Podcasts, and share our podcast if you're listening on Spotify. Let us know if you want a part two. So starting off with the first viewer question we have. First viewer question is, what was the most delicious meal you ate in Ghana? This is a really good question. Whoever asked this knows how much of a foodie I am. Um, Man, all the meals we had in Ghana were great. Honestly, I it. So the thing, like for my experience overall in Ghana, was like it reminded me quite a bit of home. The weather, the food, it was so nice and flavorful. Right, probably the best meal there were I had was like I think it was a lunch or a breakfast, surprisingly, and the spring rolls that we had, like they were some of the best spring rolls I've had. They were so crispy and very well seasoned, nice and spicy. Those spring rolls were awesome. Um, we would also have like a fruit with all our meals. So the pineapple, uh, out there, the pineapple was really great as well. It was sweet but also sour, which is like I like my pineapple more sour, and the pineapple were great. They weren't chewy or tough either. Pineapple were great, and but the best of all, was definitely was definitely the okra stew with fish and okra stew, and we would have jollof rice. Those two were the best dish I had there. In local cuisine. I mean, jollof rice is like I I'm so surprised that I have never had it before, but I'm so glad I got to try it right at the source. Jollof rice is like it's kind of like what I would say it's kind of like what chaat is to Indian people or what fried rice is also in different East Asian cultures, where everyone has their own different way of making it, and it's like everyone thinks their way is the best way. Jollof rice is that for West Africa. It's a nice flavorful rice with it's made out of it's fried rice with a few spices infused in it, and it's really nice. And the rice grain is supposed to be like a little undercooked. It has a nice bite to it, and you normally eat it with this sauce. Oh man, the name of the sauce is can't remember this time, but it's like a fish sauce. It's really spicy, and it has so much umami in it. Um, what is that name? Um, it's oh man, it's like it is the sauce. It goes with everything. Um, like literally college students just eat it with some rice or whatever. The name is man, I will get back to you on the name if I recall it, but those two things, it's like I could live on those. I don't need anything. I just need that sauce with whatever I'm having, and I'm golden. I'm golden. This is bugging me out that I can't remember the name. So I'll get in touch. I'll look it up real quick. Found it. Found it. It was Cheeto sauce. Cheeto sauce. If you have never tried Cheeto sauce, you need to try it. Look up recipes or find it at like your nearby um international grocery store or whatever. I don't know, but you have to try Cheeto. I mean, if I have not tried one since I got back to the United States because it's difficult to find something that's as good. But man, that sauce, yeah, any meal, honestly, it doesn't matter what meal I was having as long as I had that sauce, I was golden. I was golden. Um, but yeah, the most delicious, well, I didn't say the most delicious meals, but I kind of said a combination. But the most delicious food items that I had in Ghana were the Shito sauce, jollof rice. There was a okra and fish stew that I also had actually a chance to make the stew. So that, the spring rolls, and the pineapple. And we ate like kings because we had a personal cook there. So um, she would cook for us, and man, the food was amazing. And she would feed us. It was like similar to Indian hospitality, Indian mom hospitality, where it's like they just keep feeding you and feeding you and feeding you. Um, so yeah, which is why I say that all the time to my friends. It was kind of like going back home. The experiences are very similar. Um, so yeah, I had a yeah, I ate well. I had a great time there. Let's move on to the next question. Next question we have here is, what was one thing you wish you could bring home from Ghana, but ultimately was not possible? Man, this is a good question. There's like so many obvious answers, of course, like food items and like as I said, the pineapple or the Shito sauce or oh man, that I mean a lot of things, but I think for me, um, and this is like one thing I would bring home from Ghana to the United States is definitely gonna be the beds, the mattress. The mattress there, it's very similar to the kind of mattress that we have in India, where the mattress is it's more firm than soft. It's and like yeah, a lot of people would call it even hard, but man, I grew up on those hard mattresses even in India, and I'm not gonna lie, I mean I slept so well. And again, this goes back to like it was like I was home, man. Like I have not slept that well since I moved to America because y'all, the beds in America, they're just not the same. Like it feels like you like they're too comfortable. Like even the hotel beds everywhere, it's like they're too comfortable. I feel like I'm just sinking. Like feels like I'm in a quicksand and I'm gonna drown, you know? It's just not comfortable. I prefer the mattresses in India and in Ghana, and they're so much better for my back as well. Especially like tall people, back problems. What can I tell you? Yeah, the beds, I wish I could just, bring a whole mattress back home, or just Ivy who was cooking for us. Yeah, if I would have someone, I mean, I have my mom here, which I'm grateful for, but it's just tricky with being a commuter student. But yeah, having someone who always cooks for you, yeah, it's a luxury, and you should be grateful for while you have it because it's great. It's great. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to this is a quite loaded one, and I think this is a great one to kind of have more deeper conversation about Ghana and just stuff that I experienced there. And this I think this is a good way to get into that, which is like, what was one thing that was a culture shock to you? And I there were it was when I was in Ghana, again, the experiences were so similar, and like I was kind of prepared for it because because I was born and raised in India, right? So I have many experiences with like being in a post-colonial country where people are nationalistic, but it's not the kind of nationalism, right-wing nationalism of United States, but it's like you're proud of your country, you're proud of your identity post-colonialism, after the British have left. And like the weather, the warmness, and the people, it's a more communal culture. People are, more community based. It's not as individualistic as the United States. So I I would say the experience was pretty similar for me. But this was a question that somebody else asked me as well before, where like, what was a culture shock? And like I would always just reply with whoever would ask me this. It's like wasn't really a culture shock for me. I was like anticipating most of these things. Um, but I think um, when I started to think more about this question and I started looking back at pictures and everything, what I noticed that was a culture shock for me was just how clean it was. I mean, even like major metropolitan areas like Accra or Cape Coast or tourist attractions, tourist place, they were very clean for the most part, unlike India. I mean, sure, there was like some public spaces, like when we went to the waterfall or when we were near like churches or even the bigger cities, there it was a little bit untidy where people would throw trash or there were like you know um trash piles or whatever. Yeah, but for the most part, it was so much more cleaner, unlike India, where it's like because again, I was raised in India, it's like, oh yeah, everywhere except for Western first world countries, it's just trashy and dirty and like bad. But man, Ghana was so clean. I would rarely see any trash on the roads or, just thrown in the forest or whatever. Like people didn't just throw trash on just out their window or anything. Like people would be more considered. They wouldn't just throw trash in the river or whatever. They would like there would be enough trash cans around, even at like the national park we went to or anywhere we went. Like there would be enough trash cans, and people would throw the trash for the most part in the trash cans. So that was I think like when I started thinking about it, that was like a huge culture shock for me because in so many other aspects, Ghana and India have so many similarities, and that was something that I started looking into, even for my final project for this class and for when we were in Ghana, because during the end of our trip, before we were going to Cape Coast, and like when we were returning, one of those times when we were returning to Accra for our flight to go back home, it was one of those times where we were going to stop at an art gallery and a few spots in Accra, and we were just looking into we were going to stop at the Pan African Museum in Accra, um, and we were going to learn about the huge, I mean, not huge, but the role that Ghana's first prime minister and president, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, played in, you know, Pan-African identity. Because, fun fact, Ghana was the first West African country to gain its sovereignty, its independence from colonizers, from the British. So it paved the path for a lot of other West African countries and countries in Africa to gain their freedom. And so, it, um, and so the galleries we were going to visit, it was like our teacher for the class, our professor, she asked us to do some research, look into who Nkrumah is, and his I'm sorry, Nkrumah is, and his reputation, and just how people perceive him, his role, like just asked us to do like a background research. But me being me, of course, and I was able to use the internet much more freely than the others because I had a SIM card. So yeah, I just went down a rabbit hole. I started looking into his policies, his infrastructure plans. And what I learned across multiple policy points and multiple things was how similar some of his ideas were, and how similar India's first prime minister was in his policy plans, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And those similarities, I started to look into, the infrastructure plans they had, um, or educational plans, or the vision they had for their country, or foreign policy matters. And just, both countries gained their independence post World War II. And so, what was the role they played in the Second World War, and their position in the world, and what it meant for globalization during those times in general. And I came across very interesting things, um, in similarities. I mean, so Ghana gained its independence after India. India gained its independence in 1947, and Ghana gained its independence in, I believe it was 1957. Let me double check. It is 1957. Yes. Oh, so 10 years after India. So yeah. And Ghana gained its independence 10 years after India. And so a lot of the policy points were very similar, right? Where both Nehru and Nkrumah wanted to build a lot of infrastructure, wanted to industrialize their countries to compete with Western powers, and both countries were part of the non-alignment treaty, and didn't support either powers during the Cold War. And they were both very influential leaders in the eyes of their nation's people. They were revolutionaries. I mean, Nehru was part of the Indian National Congress, and their biggest leader, um, a close associate of Mahatma Gandhi as well, who was always was the most influential freedom fighter for India. Nkrumah similarly has been described as the man of the people by local newspapers and by historians alike. He was someone that was adored by the public. He had revolutionary ideas and would and and he asked for freedom. He wanted to serve the people, and they both of them had their education in England, and they chose to um, return, even though they had their education in England. They didn't have similar neoliberal um, beliefs as they were being taught, in the education systems for their degrees. Oh, actually, I am wrong on that front. Nkrumah had his education at UPenn. He had some education in London as well, but I think he got his bachelor's in America. But regardless, they had their education in the West, and yet they understood the situations they came from, and they chose to rise against those structures to lead their um, to lead their countries to sovereignty and to freedom. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg on the similarities they share. I think what fascinated me when, again, maybe this is also part of culture shock, the question that the question we were answering, but it's the focus on education and the emphasis of education in Ghana. While we were in Ghana, we were in a somewhat small village in the Volta region called Loma Fodome. So we were in Loma Fodome, which is in the Volta region, and so Loma is like a small part of a even smaller of a small village, right? It's a smaller community, and they just had a new building. So we were there to paint a school building. I think it was for higher secondary or secondary schooling, and so when we were painting the building, before we started painting, we interacted with the teachers there and some of the students, and it was like some of the teachers were like they had their education in good universities in Accra, and they decided to come back to their villages because they wanted to give back to the next generation and help the next generation out. And they were so passionate about teaching their children. They were like, oh yeah, and they would, when it was like recess or between classes, when teachers had a free time, they were lending a hand to us in painting the new school building. And again, that's a culture shock for me coming from India, because where I'm from in India, it's like everyone's trying to get out, man. Like as soon as you're done with high school, your parents figure out some way to send you to a foreign country, whether it be Canada, United States, United Kingdom, Australia, wherever they're taking, immigrants with good education, good university education or college education. And the expectations are set that, you're going to do those 4 years of college, you're going to figure out a way to get citizenship there or a way to get out of India, basically, because you're just not going to have a great future if you're going to be stuck in India. And yeah, so the goal is always to like get higher education, to get good education, to work hard and, make it, so to say. So it was, and again, I just assumed that it would be the same expectation for people here as well. And it's like, sure, the similar expectations are set, but the people here are just passionate. They were passionate to come back to their communities and to serve their communities, because these communities were the ones that helped them to get out in the first place. And I think it's so noble. I'm sure there's people like this in India as well. I just probably haven't ran into those people or haven't gotten to know those kinds of people. But it was a culture shock for me for sure. Or even just the primary chief of the village, he just convinced one of his other friends to give up land so that the village could build a uh, secondary school so that students didn't have to travel 3 hours from the village to go to a high school. Um, yeah, I think that was, yeah, it was such a noble cause. And I started looking when I was looking into Nkrumah and like his policies, that's when I came up with also his focus on education, where his plan, as soon as he was elected president and in 1961, he passed this act called the Accelerated, where is it? It's called, I'm gonna check my notes real quick. Sorry, folks. It's called the Accelerated Development Plan for Education. Um, and the plan for basically the main goal of that education act was to deliver universal primary education for all pupils in Ghana, and they slowly expanded that act to increase their offerings to all levels of schooling and to build universities and infrastructure for college students to practice their skills and to develop a skilled workforce, which is very similar to what Nehru did in India, where he built prestigious STEM institutes, management institutes, which are known as the IITs and IIMs. IIT is the Indian Institute of Technology, and IIM is the Indian Institute of Management. And those are the level of Ivy League schools in India, but they're government schools. They're managed and operated by the Indian government, and they're the most prestigious schools um, in the country. Nehru also started the space program in India, which is known as ISRO. He was also responsible for a myriad of infrastructure plans and from roads to dams to rural agricultural plans, so many things. And Nkrumah also had similar goals. In fact, I believe it was during his when he was president that the export of cacao doubled. The forestry, fishing, and cattle industry grew significantly when he was prime minister and president. And this was also right after Ghana had become independent. So really, what this reminds me of is, you know, or what it made me think basically in that time was, what does it take to build a nation post-colonialism? Where so many policies and procedures by these two leaders, two great leaders adored by their countries, was to, really jumpstart their countries. It was when I was reading about Nkrumah, it sounded a lot to me, it sounded like um some of the ideas Nkrumah had of like, instant change, sounded very similar to anarchist principles, which I was surprised to see that no one was really talking about, no one really compared his ideology to anarchist ways, which at the same time it does make sense. Why not? Um, but I thought they were very similar to anarcho-communist or anarchist ideas of like, you want these changes instantly, you want it quicker, and even he had to separate out of the UGCC, the United Gold Coast Convention, which was basically the convention that was like set up by the British um, to set up a constitution and so that people of Ghana could gain their independence. And Nkrumah was part of that convention, but then he separated out of it because he was frustrated by the slow pace at which things were moving, and he wanted freedom now. And And yeah, because of his revolutionary speeches and his revolutionary ways, he was admired by the people. He was adored by the people like a king. But yeah, the similarities are so interesting, right? We're focused on higher education, not relying on Western powers, and being self-reliant, uniting countries and nations in the nearby area as well was very important to both of these leaders. Nehru and his subordinate Sardar Patel were responsible for unifying all the princely states in India, and they were also always trying to till till independence. They always strived to have a united India, united South Asia, instead of the many different factions, partitions it went through with India, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, which again, like, tells you about the divide and conquer politics and the tactics employed by imperialists and colonialist Britishers, the different ways in which they still left behind their impact. That's what I started thinking about, because so many things in India are like the constitutions and stuff, because these politicians were educated in Western institutes who made our constitutions in Western universities. A lot of the ideas they've put forth in their new nation's constitutions are still heavily influenced by those Western principles, right? Where so many things, like, there's so much bureaucracy in India, there's so much bureaucracy in Ghana, that um, but at the same time, their founding leaders had socialist ideas, and um, they had noble ideas of a mixed economy or a state controlled economy that would serve the people. And of course, in theory, it sounds great. But when it came time to practice, and the power that the different politicians would gain in their cabinet, I mean, the leaders can have their views and values, but it's not necessary that their cabinet will share the same ideas. And so it didn't take much time for the cabinet leaders to be corrupt and exploit the power they had, hoard the money for themselves, and buy luxuries for themselves. So how things panned out is, we can look at the history books and know how things panned out. But I think what's more important is to look at and to understand the rationale of these leaders, and how they strive to create a nation, and how they strive to serve their people after so many years of subjugation. What sovereignty can is, can be. And this led to a very interesting point of conversation in our class as well, where one of my classmates is working on a similar project, which is about like religion and Adinkra symbols and the role they play in colonialism, and in just subjugation of people. And what our instructor brought up, or professor brought up during that brainstorming session, or that presentation session, was different. Um, so she brought up like the framing of the colonies, and like how, like, India wasn't necessarily a colony. It was a territory that the British ruled, but they started off as, just being traders, and they were working with the Mughal emperors, and local kings and queens, and just princely states. They came in as trade partners for spices, to to avoid the penalties or the cruelty of the Ottoman Empire. So um, it's really interesting. Versus when the British came to Africa, or any, even Portuguese or the Danes or the Swedes, when they came to Africa, it was mainly for commodities, and they came there with plans to rule. I mean, when you visited one of the castles there, the Swedes, when they were developing it, it was already set that, the way they lay down foundation, they had storage in mind. They already had it in mind to use the castle, or even the Portuguese to at the Elmina castle, to use it as slave dungeons, to hold inventory, to hold slaves as enslaved people. In fact, I this was also something that came up during our presentation: enslaved people and not slaves. But which again, I've it's an interesting framing as well, and I think it's important that more people learn about this framing of slaves and enslaved people. And I'm sure there's really good resources you can find on the internet. Um, I'm not qualified to speak on this, but that we should be using. It wasn't their choice to be slaves; they were enslaved. Yes. So, anyways, getting back to the point of when they were designing these castles, when they were given land by local tribes, by local chiefs, they had in mind already to use these spaces as enslaved people quarters, and to start the transatlantic enslaved people trade. It was, again, let us know if you would like a part two, and for me to talk about my experiences at the Elmina Castle and at the Cape Coast Castle. For today's episode, we're kind of running into the time limit. But yes, let us know if you'd like a part two. And I want viewers to think about just the framing of what it takes to bring back the soul of a nation, to develop a nation post colonialism, to bring back the identities, the cultures, and to think about the role of, nationalism plays for countries like Ghana or India in developing their identities and in developing a place in the world and in the global stage. You know, um, but this has been Yash for another episode of the Wannabe UN podcast. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone who tuned in today, and hope you have great finals. Best of luck with finals. If you are graduating, congratulations. Commencement is on May 5th. If you can make it, support your seniors. Absolutely go for the commencement, and we'll hear from you very soon. Have a great summer.